everyone, this is Vortex, and in this video I'm going to talk about the forest temple in Twilight Princess, or as I should actually call it, the temple built within the Great Deku Tree. Now you might be a little bit confused, but I'll explain everything. The forest temple is definitely one of the more unexplained temples in the game. Nevertheless, there are clues in the game that points towards the forest temple's origin. Namely, the forest temple seems to be partly built within the remains of the Great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time, and partly in the remains of the Deku Tree sprout. At first glance, the forest temple seems to be just a pair of regular hollowed out trees, and it doesn't resemble either of the Great Deku Trees very much. However, if you notice on the doors, there are Kokiri symbols everywhere. The Kokiri tribe seems to have vanished from the woods, so all we have left of them is their tribal mark. The Kokiri and the Great Deku Tree are connected to this symbol, as it resembles the ancient Kokiri emerald. The Great Deku Tree is the forest guardian and father to the Kokiri, so the symbol is a connecting factor. If we take a look at the map, then we can notice that it seems that Ordon Village and Faron Woods are near or part of the Kokiri Forest and the Lost Woods. There are two heavily forested regions, and it seems that during the hundreds of years after Ocarina of Time, the forest has spread towards the north, eventually engulfing the ruins of the Temple of Time. The first time you go to the forest temple, you'll find the hero Shade. It's curious why he shows himself here for the first time though. I was thinking that maybe it's symbolic, since Ocarina of Time Link started his adventure with a visit to the Great Deku Tree, and Twilight Princess Link visits the same place many years later to start his journey. The location of the forest temple has a trail leading up to it, just like the Great Deku Tree did in Ocarina of Time. Both areas are secluded from the rest of the forest and are only accessible by going through this trail. There are many more trees than in Ocarina of Time, but considering how much time has passed, it's not too surprising that the forest has crept towards the center. The first tree that we entered to get into the forest temple could have been growing on this spot in Ocarina of Time, in front of the Deku Tree sprout. This tree seems to be much younger though, since it's relatively small compared to the other giant trees. All of this evidence alone is not enough to support the forest temple being the Great Deku Tree though. It seems more like a reference at this point, so that's why I have done some more digging. In Ocarina of Time, the spiritual stones were divided among the three tribes of Hyrule, namely the Kokiri, the Gorons, and the Zora. In Twilight Princess, there is yet again a valuable artifact that controls fate, and it's divided among these tribes. The artifact was divided right after the interlopers were sealed. I personally believe the Dark Interlopers had been sealed away during the Era of Chaos, which is chronologically right after Skyward Sword. This is the era where the Temple of Time had yet to be built, and the Triforce was located in the Sacred Realm, but without the Master Sword acting as a key. The reason why I suspect that this event happened in this era is because it closely matches the timeline description and the fact that it happened long enough ago to be considered a legend. Midna refers to the history of the Twilight as being passed down from her ancestors. If they had been sealed before the events of Ocarina of Time, not a lot of time would have passed in order for them to speak of legends. The interlopers would easily be able to enter the Sacred Realm and obtain the Triforce had the Golden Goddesses and the Light Spirits not intervened. The power of the interlopers were sealed in a different form, the Few Shadows. This artifact was then broken up into pieces and given to the tribes of the now newly formed Kingdom of Hyrule. The Few Shadow was given to the Goron Elders, the royalty of the Zora, and you guessed it, the Great Deku Tree. We know that the tribes were in charge of protecting their piece of the Few Shadows. Gor Koron tells you this literally. We have a treasure that was entrusted to us by the spirits, and we must protect it. Now you might be thinking, the Few Shadows supposedly gifted to the Kokiri is located in the Forest Temple, and you don't actually interact with the Kokiri at all. They aren't even mentioned, and the only trace of them is the Kokiri symbol, and this makes perfect sense actually. In Ocarina of Time, the Kokiri Emerald is not given to you by the Kokiri themselves. The Great Deku Tree gives it to you after you break the curse. The Deku Tree was guarding the stone, not the Kokiri themselves. And this is yet again the case in Twilight Princess. Before the Great Deku Tree died in Ocarina of Time, he already had his piece of the Few Shadow, but since he dies, the Few Shadow was left abandoned in the tree itself until Link came and took it many years later. This is why you find this part of the Few Shadow in a seemingly random place. The Great Deku Tree is a being that can reincarnate of sorts by planting a new seed. In the Adult Link timeline, we encounter the Deku Tree sprout. This sprout grows up to be the Great Deku Tree of the Wind Waker, but it's not too odd for him to also be there in the Child Link timeline. After all, since the future where Ganondorf became King of Evil never happened, the Sprout would have all the time in the world to grow up peacefully. This Sprout grew up to be the next Great Deku Tree of the Childling timeline. Now you might be wondering what could have killed this new Great Deku Tree. The answer is given in the game itself actually. The boss you fight in the Forest Temple is called the Ababa. It is referred to by the game as a Twilight Parasite. The Great Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time also died by a parasite, which was Goma. Both trees were in the end felled by the same thing. After the parasite killed the new Deku Tree, it migrated further back into the temple to the place where the Few Shadow was stored. There it settled, perhaps trying to leech energy of the ancient artifact, turning it into a twilight creature. These events probably happened pretty recently, since the first Deku Tree enter is still greenish, while the other one in the far back, containing the boss room, is very grey like in Ocarina of Time. I discovered some interesting things while scanning the area inside the boss room in the Forest Temple. The boss room looks strikingly similar to this part of the Deku Tree that we see in Ocarina of Time. Considering how much Twilight Princess redesigned known landmarks, like the Temple of Time, it's astonishing how similar this room looks compared to its potential Ocarina of Time counterpart. The bottomless water could be a reference to the hole you go through to reach Goma in Ocarina of Time. It could have been filled with water over time. Also on the ceiling there's a very weird pattern. This could be the place where the Few Shadow was hidden away. Since the new Deku Tree died, the Kokiri at this point no longer have a guardian. The Great Deku Tree seems to be the one force keeping evil away from the forest, and when it perished, evil was able to enter the woods again. This happened in Ocarina of Time as well. If you talk to one of the boys before you beat the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time, he will say, "Since the Great Deku Tree withered, more meanies have been appearing in the forest." The other Kokiri say similar things. Most likely the exact same event happened again in Twilight Princess. The Kokiri were left without any protection and they were either killed or they fled to deeper parts of the woods. This is why you don't find any of them during Twilight Princess and you only stumble upon their tribal marks. It's possible they left it in honor of their lost forest deity.